process right now.
A little bit of denial. All right, Jordan Holman, consumer and retail reporter for Bloomberg Extraordinaire. Here's my question to you. Retail sales, we learned this week, are up 0.9% March to April. That, I think, was the fourth consecutive month of increase. How long does that keep up as the aforementioned agita that we're having in this economy takes hold?
Yeah, it seems like we are coming to an end of that growth. And the important caveat of that growth that we saw in April is that it was not adjusted for inflation, the numbers that we saw this week. So we do not know how much is taken into account if people are just spending more on the same items that they would have paid a lower price for this time last year. So that's super important. And then also the other thing is, how are people paying for that? Is that on credit cards? Because that has another implication for debt. So right now, to Sudeep's point, people are adjusting expectations for what this economy is going to look like and how consumers should be spending.
Yeah, I think people are adjusting. The stock market is adjusting, as Sudeep said, and businesses are adjusting. To which, Jordan, let me ask you one more thing. The story out of Target and Walmart this week about lower margins, inventory challenges. What are you hearing from the people who are in charge of these big retail companies about their prospects, I suppose?
Yeah, there's a lot of noise in the retail sector right now. So the main thread that I'm hearing is that consumer behavior has just shifted so rapidly that there was an expectation that people were going to start spending more on services and goods, or also the type of goods that they were going to buy were going to change. So more in the grocery and food and gas, because people know that they're going to spend more money, so they might pull back on discretionary items like apparel. But when you're a large company like Target, you're ordering things out months in advance. So to switch that quickly is very difficult. And that's why you saw dramatic shifts in sell-offs for Target. It was the most since 1987. And that goes back to those expectations changing, just because these are big ships that have to change their strategies.
Yeah, the company was down, like shares were down like 25% in a day. All right, so Sudeep, let me ask you this, and I'm intentionally not prejudging the likelihood or not likelihood of recession, right? But it is much more in the air than it was even a couple of weeks ago. And so the question to you is not whether you think it's going to happen, but what are you going to be looking for? What are the indicators to you over the next, 8, 12 months that this economy is slowing sharply?
So obviously the most important indicator is the job market, is job growth, it's wage growth, how much that gets dented along the way. That's really going to be the driver. The super hot job market is a leading driver of wage growth, which is good until we see 8% inflation, and that's what needs to get addressed. Look, there's a recession, and then there's a recession.
Right.
If we have some light rain, a very mild recession, that's kind of what that's Jay Powell's dream right now. That is, you have a little bit of a pullback in consumer spending. You let us get through this period. You have a small adjustment, and then come back out of it. But this lurching of the economy, 2 years ago, we were in negative oil prices, store shutdowns, nobody on an airplane. Now you can't get a seat on an airplane. It's all the opposite. How do you plan for that? If you're a business, how do you plan for that? If you're a consumer, how do you plan for that? If you still got your stuff stuck on a boat somewhere on a ship trying to come over, how do you plan for that? We kind of just need to go through a brief cleansing period to get the system back in order, and hope we come out of it quickly. But it just needs to be brief, because the downside is that it takes a long time, and that's just too painful for all of us.
Yeah, the cleanse is always so hard. So Jordan, let me ask you this: what are you looking for to indicate that there's substantial economic slowing coming?
So looking at that consumer sentiment, because that is futuristic, how people are feeling about that. Deloitte just had some data out today actually showing that the level of people being concerned about their savings has jumped up to 52% from 40% of Americans saying they're concerned. So looking at how people feel about the economy is really key, and it also gives indications about, do they feel comfortable buying big ticket items? Do they feel comfortable buying discretionary items, and then that gives us into how retailers need to plan for the future.
Jordan Holman, she's at Bloomberg, where she does consumers and retail. Sudeep Reddy's at Politico, where he's one of the people in charge. Thanks, you two. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Kai.
Thanks, Kai.
Wall Street mostly flat finish to a mostly ugly week, as we have detailing all week. Details, numbers, when we get it. The general central bank vibe of late, if central banks can be said to have vibes, is that interest rates are going up to help get a handle on inflation, right? That's what Sudeep was talking about. The Fed, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank is expected to raise this summer. One bank going in the opposite direction, though, the People's Bank of China has decided to cut an important interest rate by a fraction of a percent to stimulate its economy. Marketplace's Justin Ho has more on that one.
China's economy is in so much trouble right now that for the first time since 1976, the U.S. economy, according to Bloomberg Economics, is going to grow faster than China's.
You have the numbers just tumbling across China, from steel production to coal to consumer spending to property.
That's Ann Stevenson-Yang at J Capital Research. China's numbers are tumbling in large part because of the country's zero COVID policy, which has caused many parts of the economy to grind to a halt.
I'm sure there's a joke by now in China that they've achieved, zero employment and zero production before they've achieved zero COVID.
China's central bank cut only one benchmark interest rate, the one that's used to price mortgages. Mark Williams at Capital Economics says China's been trying to prop up its housing sector,
particularly housing sales, which have been weak and falling for quite some time.
China would like to do more to juice its economy, but it has a problem: the Federal Reserve. Its rate hikes are luring investment to the U.S. David Dollar is with the China Center at the Brookings Institution. He says China's concerned that if it lowers its rates too much,
there would be massive capital outflows. That tends to increase inflation because it makes imported things more expensive.
in other words, the value of China's currency would tank. That would make Chinese goods cheaper and help the Chinese economy. But it's not the message the country wants to send right now, says Wing Tai Wu with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network.
One of the biggest tensions between U.S. and China has been trade issues, and this could be misinterpreted as exchange rate manipulation.
Especially, Wu says, given how much the U.S. has been buying from China. I'm Justin Howe for Marketplace.
Without discount
Bigyan
for
may
a
love setup si
second, the real
Boss
stress
Samar.
and fear that parents of infants who need
Maraming
formula
salamat.
have been feeling lately,
Wala kasi akong
there
glasses.
is an
Hindi ko
economic
masyadong
object
nababasa.
lesson in this whole debacle. Market concentration. Just 4 companies, as you've no doubt heard, make 90% of the formula sold in this country. So that recall and plant closure at just one of those companies that really tipped things over the edge, that's having some pretty serious ripple effects. The thing is, though, you can find similar concentration in lots of other places in the American economy. Marketplace's Savannah Marr has that one.
When we talk about market concentration, we're measuring the number of companies selling a product and each company's share of the total market.
So a market is considered highly concentrated if there are a small number of suppliers with relatively high shares.
Lee Moore Daphne is a professor at Harvard Business School. She says concentration gives companies more power to control prices. Plus,
if one of those firms is taken out of the business for any reason,
like a massive recall and a plant closure, no one's waiting to pick up the slack,
which could lead to price hikes and shortages.
During the pandemic, we've seen this play out with meat and computer chips. Brian Kalachi is chief economist with the Open Market Institute. He says you'll find market concentration everywhere, from seeds for growing crops to cowboy boots to airlines.
Anyone, who's over the age of 20 has seen the number of airlines decline, they've seen the prices rise, and the experience of traveling deteriorate.
So how did we get here? Eleanor Fox studies competition policy at the NYU School of Law.
A merger policy that has been too lenient is one of the culprits.
For a few decades, Fox says the federal government has been pretty lax when two competing companies want to become one.
Saying, oh, mergers are fine and efficient, and if there are 4 firms left in a market or 3 firms left in a market, that's fine for competition.
Fox says the baby formula crisis should show us that that's not always the case. I'm Savannah Marr for Marketplace.
How many times do you suppose you've heard me say over the past couple of years some version of, boy, this is a really tight labor market, way more jobs available than there are people to fill them? So how come then in its earnings call this week, as I was talking to Jordan about, Walmart said one reason for its profit decline last quarter was because they were overstaffed. Amazon said something similar earlier this month. What now? Marketplace's Kristen Schwab looked into that one.
As a shopper, you may feel like the pandemic is over. Retailers, not so much, because COVID outbreaks can still take down their workforce. John Talbot directs the Center for Research and Education in Retail at Indiana University.
You know, in terms of staffing for that, it's challenging.
Companies need extra employees when people call out sick, and they're still trying to figure out, will people shop online or in stores, or keep using curbside pickup? Talbot says this affects how companies hire.
And so you end up having some excess capacity that I don't think they would have expected.
He says short term, overstaffing is better than missing sales. And it means some retailers are hiring more people part-time, says Alan Benson, who studies staffing strategies at the University of Minnesota.
Companies are going to be experimenting with more models of achieving greater flexibility, and that could very well be a long-term trend to come.
A trend of hyper part-time or seasonal workers worries David Weil, a labor market expert at Brandeis University, because he says the whole takeaway from the Great Resignation is that workers are looking for consistency and opportunities to grow.
This is not the time